When Sandra first stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the quiet stretch of Los Angeles streets below, she did not expect her heart to feel so heavy. The morning sun had barely lifted itself above the horizon, still hiding behind thin clouds that softened its glow. It was the kind of light that made everything look gentler than it really was, the kind of light that could hide the cracks in a person's life if they did not look too closely. But Sandra was looking closely, not at the city she had seen 1,000 times before, but at the thought rising inside her, a thought she had pushed away for years. It had come back stronger than ever, asking her why she had been afraid to confront something so simple and yet so terrifying. This morning, she knew the truth she had avoided for so long would not stay quiet anymore. She had lived in a world of bright lights and distant cameras for most of her life, and people often believed that such a world came with comfort, confidence, and easy happiness. But Sandra knew that fame could not protect a person from feelings that grew slowly and quietly, settling into the corners of the heart. Even surrounded by people, she had felt alone with this one question that she had never dared to answer. It pressed against her ribs as she breathed in the cool morning air. She hoped it might fade, but instead it grew heavier. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, afraid of hearing her own voice, afraid of what it might reveal. The sound of her phone vibrating on the table behind her startled her. She turned, expecting a message from her assistant or a reminder about the interviews scheduled for later that day. But when she glanced down, she froze. It was a text from Keanu. She had not seen his name appear on her phone in weeks. Despite their long friendship, they often went long stretches without speaking, each lost in the rhythm of their own lives. But whenever they reconnected, it felt like the time between them had vanished, as if no distance or silence could ever erase the bond that had quietly formed years ago on the set where everything had begun. She picked up the phone slowly, as though touching it might change the meaning of the words on the screen. The message was short, almost too simple, yet it carried a weight she could not ignore. "Are you free today? I want to talk to you about something important." Her stomach tightened. The words echoed around her thoughts in a way she did not expect. Keanu rarely used the word important unless it truly was. He was gentle, careful with his emotions, respectful of other people's space, and always humble even when he had no reason to be. If he said something mattered, then it did. And the timing could not have been more unsettling, because she had woken up already thinking about him, about the silence between them, about the truth she had been too afraid to face for years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed back, "Yes, I'm free." She hesitated, then added, "Is everything okay?" She waited, holding her breath. The seconds felt like minutes, stretching into something unbearable. She tried to calm herself, reminding her mind not to jump to conclusions. She reminded herself that Keanu was unpredictable in the gentlest possible way. He could surprise people with kindness, with a sudden depth that others often misunderstood. He could show up when no one expected him to, offer comfort without asking for anything in return, and disappear again with the same quiet grace. But he rarely reached out like this, asking for a meeting with such urgency written between the lines. Finally, her phone buzzed. "Everything is okay. I just want to see you, maybe around noon." She exhaled slowly, trying to understand the feeling climbing through her chest. It was part relief, part fear, part something she did not want to name. She agreed to meet him, and as she set the phone down, she felt a strange rush of emotion that she could not explain. It was as though the universe had decided to push her forward, refusing to let her hide in the comfortable shadows she had kept around her heart. The day moved too quickly after that. Every small task she attempted felt distant, as though her mind was somewhere else entirely. She replayed old memories of Keanu without wanting to. The first time they laughed together between takes. The quiet conversations they shared while waiting for cameras to reset. The strange but wonderful comfort of sitting near each other even without speaking. She remembered the way he looked at her sometimes, as if he saw more than she allowed anyone else to see. She remembered the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, and the simple, unspoken trust that had formed between them. By the time noon approached, she felt like her heart was beating upstairs in her throat instead of in her chest. She drove carefully through the winding streets until she reached the small, hidden cafe where Keanu had asked to meet. He often chose places that were calm and familiar, places where he could be anonymous and at peace. She parked her car and took a deep breath before stepping out, brushing her hair back as she tried to steady her nerves. She walked inside the cafe, the soft scent of coffee and baked bread wrapping around her like a warm blanket. She scanned the room and found him sitting near the corner, his posture relaxed, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Something about the way he sat there made her chest tighten again. He looked calm, almost too calm, as if he had been waiting not just for this meeting, but for something deeper, something he had held inside for a long time. When he saw her, his face lit up with a gentle, genuine smile, the kind that always carried warmth without demanding anything in return. She felt her breath hitch slightly, but she forced herself to smile back. She walked toward him, and for a moment, time felt slow. It was strange how someone she had known for so many years could still make her feel unsteady. She sat down quietly, and he looked at her with eyes that held a quiet intensity she did not understand. "Hey," he said softly, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of warmth and truth. "Hey," she replied, though her voice felt thinner than she wanted. They exchanged a few simple words, small talk that barely held their attention. She felt as though he was searching for the right way to begin, and she did not want to rush him. She watched his hands, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the mug, the way his shoulders tightened ever so slightly. He seemed calm on the surface, but Sandra had known him long enough to sense when something deeper was stirring inside him. Finally, he looked up, meeting her eyes with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, and his voice held a quiet strength she was not prepared for. Her heart pounded. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He took a slow breath, as though gathering the courage to say something he had held back for far too long. "I've been thinking a lot," he began gently. "About us, about the years we've known each other, about the moments that stayed with me long after they passed." She felt her throat tighten, and she blinked slowly, trying not to reveal how much his words affected her. "I don't want to say this the wrong way," he continued, "but I don't want to keep silent anymore. It feels unfair, not just to me, but to you too." Sandra swallowed hard. Her hands rested on her lap, but she could feel her fingers trembling slightly. She tried to speak, but he continued before she could. "I care about you," he said softly, the words trembling with truth. "More than I let myself admit for a long time, and I need to be honest about that." Her breath caught. The cafe suddenly felt too quiet, too still, as though the air itself was waiting for her reaction. She opened her lips, but no words came out. She stared at him, trying to understand the depth of what he had just revealed. She had imagined this moment before in the silent spaces of her life, but she had never believed it would actually come. Keanu looked down for a moment, his voice softening even further. "I didn't say this to make things complicated," he continued. "I said it because it hurts more to stay silent, and because I think you deserve the truth." A wave of emotion rushed through her, overwhelming in its intensity. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show, shook something inside her. She felt tears press behind her eyes, not from sadness, but from the rawness of the moment. She finally found her voice, though it felt fragile. "Why now?" she whispered. He looked at her, and she could see something deep and gentle in his eyes, something that had been hidden for years. "Because holding it back feels wrong," he answered quietly. "And because something recently made me realize that we don't always get as much time as we think." Her breath quickened. She leaned forward, searching his expression, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. "What do you mean?" she asked softly, the fear in her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. Keanu hesitated, his eyes drifting away for a moment. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table, betraying an emotion he was trying hard to control. But then he looked back at her, and he said something that made her entire world tilt. Something she never expected to hear. Something that changed everything. He whispered in a voice thick with emotion, "There's something I haven't told you yet." And before she could ask, before she could breathe, before the truth could reveal itself, someone approached their table, interrupting the moment, and the expression on Keanu's face made her heart stop. Because she realized instantly, whatever he was about to say was far more serious than she had imagined. And now she had to wonder. Was she ready to hear the truth? The moment the stranger stepped beside their table, Sandra felt the tension in the air shift sharply, as if a quiet thread holding everything together had just snapped. Keanu's eyes flicked upward, and the sudden change in his expression unsettled her. It was not fear exactly, but something close to it, something heavy, something hidden. It tightened his jaw and softened his eyes at the same time, creating a strange mix of emotion that she could not read. The stranger was a man in his late 30s, dressed plainly, with a phone in his hand and an apologetic look on his face. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said gently, "but they're waiting for you outside." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the table. He did not answer right away. Sandra felt her breath catch, wondering who they were and why they needed him at this exact moment. The silence stretched until the man shifted awkwardly, glancing between them before stepping back. He waited near the door as if giving Keanu a moment to finish what he had started. Keanu's shoulders rose with a slow breath, and when he finally looked back at her, Sandra felt something tremble inside her. There was so much he had not said yet, so much she now feared he might be too afraid to say at all. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I didn't expect this to happen right now." She leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding. "Keanu, what is going on? What were you about to tell me?" He looked at her with an ache in his eyes that unsettled her more than anything else. It was a look she had never seen on his face, not even during the hardest years of his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but the uncertainty on his face grew deeper, and he closed it again, as if the words were too heavy to release. "Can we talk later?" he asked quietly. "I promise I'm not running away, I need to handle something." She felt disappointment rise inside her, but also concern. She knew him, truly knew him. He was not someone who hid things out of fear. If he hesitated, it meant the truth was complicated, delicate, or painful. She reached out and touched the edge of the table near his hand, not quite touching him, but close enough to let him know she wasn't angry. "Okay," she said gently, "I trust you." His eyes warmed at her words, and for a moment the heaviness in his expression softened. Then he stood, his movements slow, as though his body fought against leaving. He gave her one last look, quiet, longing, almost vulnerable, before turning away and walking toward the man waiting by the door. Sandra watched him leave, her heart a mixture of hope, fear, and confusion. Something wasn't right. She could feel it deep inside her. Keanu had always been honest with her, even in silence. But today there was a weight behind his words, something that reached beyond simple affection or unspoken feelings. As he stepped outside, she noticed two other people waiting for him near a black car. The way they stood, the way they spoke to each other, the way they kept looking around, they were not fans and they were not friends. They looked official. Maybe security, maybe something else. It didn't make sense. She watched Keanu speak to them for a moment, his posture tense but calm. Then he climbed into the car, and within seconds, it pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Sandra exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her like a dense fog. What was he hiding? The rest of her afternoon drifted by with unsettling slowness. She tried focusing on her meetings and interviews, but her mind kept slipping back into that cafe. Every expression on his face, every pause in his words, every small detail replayed in her thoughts. She kept turning them over, searching for meaning, searching for clues. But the more she thought, the more unanswered questions rose inside her. She stepped inside her home and closed the door behind her. The stillness of the rooms greeted her with an almost painful familiarity. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. She did not want to admit it, but she felt an ache in her chest, a quiet fear that something was slipping away before she even had the chance to understand it. Her phone buzzed. She nearly dropped the glass. But when she checked, it was not from Keanu. It was her manager reminding her about a late virtual meeting. She stared at the message for several seconds, then placed the phone down again. Her heart was too busy worrying about someone else. She moved through the house slowly, her mind drifting deeper into memories she had kept tucked away for years. She remembered the first time she saw Keanu smile during a long day of filming when they were young. He had been quiet until she told him a story about her dog, and something about the simplicity of it made him laugh. She remembered the unexpected warmth she felt. She remembered wondering, even back then, why that small moment stayed with her long after the day ended. She remembered the first time they hugged off camera, the first quiet moment they shared after a long scene, the way he listened to her like her words were something valuable. She remembered the softness in his eyes when he encouraged her through a difficult period in her life, the way he would check on her without making it obvious to others. These little memories piled up in her mind like a collection of moments she had been too afraid to examine closely. But now they felt sharper, clearer, almost urgent. She finally sat on the couch trying to push her thoughts away when there was a sudden knock at the door. She froze, staring at the entrance. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart skipped a beat. She moved slowly toward the door and opened it just a crack. A man in a dark jacket stood there, holding an envelope. He looked relieved when he saw her. "Ms. Bullock," he asked gently. She nodded, her stomach tightening. "This is for you," he said, offering the envelope. "From someone who said you would understand." Sandra's breath caught. "Who?" The man hesitated. "I was told not to say." She felt a small shiver run down her spine. She accepted the envelope, and the man gave her a polite nod before walking away. She watched him leave, then quickly closed the door and locked it. She held the envelope carefully, as though it might crumble in her hands. She sat down and stared at it, her pulse quickening. It was unmarked, simple, sealed tightly. She slipped her finger under the flap and opened it slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded twice. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Keanu's. Her breath caught when she saw the first words. "I didn't want to say this in public, and I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly. I hope you can forgive me. There is something you need to know, and I didn't want to keep you waiting." Her hands trembled harder. "Something happened recently, something I can't avoid anymore. I didn't want to worry you, but I also didn't want to lie. It's not about work and it's not about the past. It's something more personal, something urgent." She swallowed, her vision blurring with tension. "Please meet me tonight. I'll explain everything." There was no signature, no location written under the message. She flipped the paper over. Written on the back, in even smaller handwriting. "The place where we once talked about the stars." Sandra's heart stopped. She knew exactly where that was. It was a quiet hill outside the city, a place they had discovered during filming years ago. They had once stood there after a late-night shoot, wrapped in jackets, looking at the stars scattered across the sky. They had talked about dreams, fears, and how strange it felt to be seen by millions yet misunderstood by most. It was a moment she had never forgotten, even though she had never spoken about it again. She stood up, clutching the note. Whatever this was, whatever truth he had been holding back, it was serious enough that he chose to write instead of calling. Serious enough that he wanted to meet far from the public eye. But there was something else beneath her fear, something warm and painful all at once. Keanu trusted her enough to share something that scared him. She grabbed her keys. She needed to go. As she drove through the evening streets, the sky shifted from pale blue to deep violet. The road stretched ahead of her, quiet and uncrowded. Her breath was shaky, her thoughts conflicting, but she kept going. She had to know. She needed to understand why he had looked at her with such urgency, why he had hesitated, why he had written that message. When she reached the hill, she drove slowly to the top, where the world opened into a quiet view of the city lights glowing beneath the darkening sky. She parked and stepped out of the car, holding her jacket close as the cool breeze brushed against her skin. The air smelled of pine and silence. She walked a few steps forward and stopped. Keanu was there. Standing at the edge of the hill, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly upward as though he were studying the sky again, just like that night years ago. When he heard her footsteps, he turned. And she froze, because the expression on his face was not what she expected. It carried sadness, fear, and something deeper, something that made her knees feel weak. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a single word, a sound echoed from the trees behind them. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping under weight. Keanu's eyes widened. He stepped forward quickly, reaching for her arm. "Sandra," and in that split second, before she could turn, before she could react, before she could even ask what was happening, a shadow moved through the darkness behind her. Then another's, and another's. She felt her heart slam against her ribs as she realized. They were not alone. And whatever Keanu had been trying to tell her, whatever truth he had been carrying, was about to reveal itself in a way she could never have imagined for a moment. Sandra could not move. Her body stiffened, her breath caught, and her heart pounded so forcefully that she felt it in her throat. The shadows emerging from the darkness felt unreal at first, like tricks of the night, but the sound of footsteps crushing dry leaves quickly shattered any illusion. Someone or several someones were coming toward them with intentional steps, deliberate and unhurried, as if they already knew exactly where she and Keanu were. Keanu stepped in front of her without hesitation, placing himself between her and the approaching figures. The protective gesture was quiet but unmistakably urgent. His back was solid, steady, and his posture shifted slightly, as though he had been expecting this, or at least preparing for something like it. Sandra felt a cold ripple of fear run through her. She clutched the sleeves of her jacket tightly, forcing herself to breathe. Two shapes finally stepped out from behind the line of trees. The moonlight revealed their faces, two men, dressed simply but carrying an uneasy energy that made Sandra's stomach twist. They were not threatening in the usual sense. They had no weapons, no raised voices, no aggressive stance. Instead, they stood calmly, like people who believed they had every right to be there. One of the men nodded at Keanu. "We need to talk." Keanu raised a hand slightly, a quiet signal for them to stop. "Not tonight," he said, his voice steady but tired. "I told you I needed time." The man on the left shook his head. "Time is the one thing you don't have anymore." Sandra's breath hitched at the words. She felt her fear knot itself inside her chest, wrapping tighter with every passing second. She looked at Keanu, searching his face for answers, for reassurance, for anything that could ease the growing panic inside her. But Keanu's expression remained composed, though she could see the tension in the corner of his jaw. "We're not here to cause trouble," the second man said. "We just need to finish what we started." Keanu's voice lowered, soft but firm. "I told you I wasn't ready." "You don't have to be ready," the man replied. "You just have to come with us." Sandra stepped forward slightly, unable to stay silent any longer. "What is going on? Who are you? Why are you here?" The two men exchanged a brief look, as though silently deciding how much to reveal. Keanu turned to her for a moment, his eyes filled with apology and something deeper, something she could not yet name. He placed a hand gently on her arm, grounding her. "Sandra," he murmured, "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to get pulled into this." "Pulled into what?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. "Keanu, please, you need to tell me." The man on the left stepped forward slightly. "He will, but not here." Keanu tensed at the man's words. His hand on Sandra's arm tightened protectively. "You're not taking me tonight," he said again, more firmly this time. "Not until I explain everything to her." Silence fell over the hill, heavy and suffocating. The men didn't argue, but they didn't step back either. Their presence alone was enough to keep the tension sharp and dangerous. Finally, the second man sighed. "You have until morning." Keanu's shoulders loosened just a little, though the tension did not truly fade. "Thank you." Both men turned and disappeared back into the trees. Their steps were quiet, but the air felt charged even after they were gone. Sandra stood frozen, staring at the space where they had stood moments before. The night felt colder now, and the silence felt deeper, as though the world was holding its breath. Keanu turned to her, his eyes soft with concern. "Are you okay?" She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't understand what any of that was. Keanu, what is happening?" He stepped closer, hesitating for just a second before resting his hand on her shoulder. The gesture was gentle, grounding, filled with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold fear inside her. "I'm going to tell you," he whispered. "I should have told you earlier, but I was trying to figure out how. I didn't want to worry you." "Keanu," she said, her voice cracking. "They were talking like something is wrong, really wrong." He looked down, his expression shadowed by something heavy. "Something is wrong, but not in the way you think." Sandra felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Then tell me, please." He took a deep breath, the kind of breath someone takes before stepping into a truth they've avoided for too long. "Those men, they're part of something I've been involved in for months now, something personal, something I didn't expect to become this serious." She frowned slightly, her fear mixing with confusion. "Involved how? Keanu, they didn't look like." "They're not dangerous," he interrupted gently, though his eyes flickered with doubt. "Not exactly. But they're connected to something that's been putting pressure on me, something I agreed to help with before I realized how much it would take from me." She stared at him, searching his face for clarity. "What kind of something?" He hesitated again. And then, unexpectedly, he took her hand. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't romantic or bold. It was soft, trembling, and honest. A small act that carried more weight than any word he had said that night. "Sandra," he whispered, "I didn't just ask to see you today because of feelings. I meant what I said earlier. I care about you deeply, maybe more than I ever allowed myself to admit, but that wasn't the only thing I wanted to tell you." Her breath quickened, his fingers curled slightly around hers. "The truth is, something has been happening to me, something I didn't want you to find out like this, something I hoped I could manage on my own." Her heart pounded louder. She squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him. "Keanu," she said softly, "whatever it is, you're not alone." He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though letting her words give him strength. But when he opened them again, there was fear there. Real fear. "I've been sick," he whispered. The words hit her like a sudden blow. She felt her knees weaken and her breath trembled in her chest. She stared at him, waiting, hoping she had misheard, but the pain in his eyes told her she hadn't. "What do you mean, sick?" she murmured. He looked away briefly, gathering himself. "It started a few months ago, small things at first, nothing that seemed serious. I tried to ignore it, but things got worse. Tests were done, conversations were had, and then those men got involved when they shouldn't have." Her voice cracked. "Keanu, what kind of sick?" He swallowed tightly, his voice barely holding together. "The kind that doesn't always leave you with as much time as you think." Her breath left her body, her hand flew to her mouth. Tears gathered instantly, blurring her vision. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, please don't say that." But he squeezed her hand gently, grounding her even as her world began to shake. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said softly. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" she choked out. "Keanu, you should have told me, you should have." "I was scared," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "Scared of letting you see me like this, scared of how it would change everything between us, scared of losing you before I even had the courage to tell you how I felt." She felt tears slide down her face silently. The night air felt heavy, pressing against her chest. The city lights below blurred with the tears she tried to blink away. She stepped closer to him, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you trust me with this? Why did you think I wouldn't stay?" He reached up, brushing a tear gently from her cheek, his touch soft and trembling. "Because people leave when things get hard," he whispered, "and you mean too much to me to risk that." She shook her head fiercely, stepping closer so their foreheads nearly touched. "I'm not leaving. Do you hear me? I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Keanu's breath trembled, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a deep, desperate embrace. He held her tightly, his arms wrapping around her like he had been waiting for this moment far longer than he had admitted. Their breaths mixed, their hearts pressed close, and the silence between them was filled with more emotion than any words could carry. They stood like that for a long moment on the hill under the soft glow of the night sky. Until another sound tore through the air. A car engine. Fast. Approaching from the bottom of the hill. Sandra pulled back slightly, her heart jumping. Keanu turned sharply toward the sound. Headlights cut through the darkness, speeding up the hill. Getting closer. Too fast. Keanu's eyes widened with sharp, sudden fear. "They weren't supposed to come back tonight," he whispered, his voice tense. Sandra stepped behind him instinctively. The car skidded to a stop just a few feet away, gravel flying. The door flew open, and the man from earlier stepped out, his face pale, tense, and urgent. "Keanu," he called out, breathless, "we have a problem." Keanu's jaw tightened. "What happened?" The man looked at Sandra, then back at Keanu. "It's your test results," he said, voice shaking. "They changed." Keanu froze. Sandra felt the world tilt. The man swallowed hard, his face filled with dread. "You need to come with us now." For a long second, Sandra could not move. Her body froze, her lungs tightened, and the world around her fell into a deep, awful silence. The man's words echoed inside her mind, sharp and heavy, as if they had struck the ground and cracked open something she wasn't prepared to face. Test results. Changed. The phrases repeated themselves until her heartbeat turned loud and uneven. Keanu stood perfectly still beside her, his face pale and unreadable under the thin moonlight. She could not tell if he was afraid or simply trying to stay steady for her sake. Keanu took a slow step toward the man, his posture stiff but controlled. "What do you mean changed?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm, though Sandra could feel the tension radiating from him. The man glanced at her again as if unsure whether she should be hearing this. Then he sighed, shaking his head slightly. Keanu, we told you we were running more tests because the first results didn't line up with your symptoms. Something wasn't adding up. The second round of tests came back faster than expected, and we need to take you in tonight. Keanu's jaw tightened. I told you I would come tomorrow. And we told you tomorrow might be too late, the man said, his voice strained. We didn't know how serious it was until now. Sandra's stomach twisted. Her hands felt cold, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold her body together. She forced herself to speak, though her voice trembled. Keanu, what is he talking about? What changed? Please tell me. Keanu turned to her slowly, and for the first time that night she saw real fear in his eyes, quiet, deep, and raw. It shook her more than anything else. He opened his mouth, but the words seemed to get caught in his throat. The man stepped forward. Ms. Bullock, he said gently, this really isn't the place. Keanu raised a hand to stop him. She has a right to know. Sandra's heart pounded painfully. She waited, holding on to whatever strength she could find in the moment. The wind rustled through the trees behind them, and the city lights flickered softly in the distance, as if the world itself were leaning in, listening. Keanu took a slow breath. They think it might be worse than they first told me. Her breath faltered. Worse how? He swallowed hard. They found something else, something they didn't catch before. Sandra shook her head, a soft, desperate sound escaping her. Keanu, no, please tell me you're okay. He stepped closer and gently placed his hands on her arms, grounding her. I don't know what it means yet, he said softly, but I need to find out, and I didn't want you to hear it like this. The man behind him shifted impatiently. Keanu, we don't have time. Keanu turned back to him, irritation flickering across his features. Give me a minute. The man pressed his lips together, but nodded reluctantly. Keanu turned to Sandra again, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them. He touched her face gently, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was warm, comforting, so achingly familiar that it made her heart break. I wanted to tell you everything today, he whispered. I just needed the right moment. I wanted you to hear it when I could breathe through it, when I wasn't terrified. I didn't want you to see me like this, scared, unsure, broken. She shook her head fiercely and grabbed his hands. You don't need to hide anything from me. Don't shut me out. Not now, not with this. He looked down, his voice barely holding itself together. I'm not trying to shut you out. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want this to be the thing that pushes you away. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice breaking. I'm here, I'm not leaving, do you hear me? I don't care what this is, I don't care how bad it is. I want to be with you through this. Keanu closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, as if her words eased a pain he had been carrying for far too long. When he opened them again, there was a softness there, a quiet gratitude that made Sandra's chest ache. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. Their breaths mingled, their hands intertwined, and for a moment the fear faded, replaced by something deeper, something warm and steady and painfully real. But then, the man cleared his throat harshly. Keanu, we really need to go, it's urgent. The moment shattered. Keanu stepped back slightly, though his hand remained tightly wrapped around Sandra's. I have to go, he said softly. I can't ignore this anymore. Then I'm going with you, she said instantly. Keanu shook his head, his voice gentle but firm. You can't come with me tonight, not where they're taking me. Her stomach dropped. Why not? He looked away, his breath unsteady. Because this isn't a normal hospital visit, and you don't need to be dragged into something that might get complicated. Complicated how? She asked, fear returning like a sharp wave. He hesitated. That hesitation terrified her. She stepped closer, refusing to back down. Keanu, look at me. I'm not leaving you alone in this. Not now, not tomorrow, not ever. Whatever this is, I'm staying. He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression torn between relief and fear. Finally, he nodded slowly, though the uncertainty in his eyes did not fade. Okay, he whispered, but you have to let me go with them tonight. I don't know how long this will take. I don't know what they're going to find. She squeezed his hand tightly. And when you're done, you'll call me. You'll tell me everything. Promise me. His voice trembled softly. I promise. She didn't let go of his hand until the man stepped forward again, gently insisting it was time. Keanu pulled away reluctantly, their fingers sliding apart with painful slowness. Sandra felt a hollow ache open inside her chest as he walked toward the car, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the open door, he paused and looked back at her, eyes filled with fear, apology, and something deeper, something that made Sandra's breath catch. She saw it clearly for the first time. Love. He wasn't hiding it anymore. Not from her. Not from himself. Then he nodded, climbed into the car, and closed the door. The engine rumbled to life. The headlights swept across the grass. The vehicle turned and began its descent down the hill, shrinking farther and farther into the night until it disappeared completely. Sandra stood alone under the moonlight, her body trembling, her hands cold, her heart aching with everything she couldn't say. The silence around her felt heavier than before, pressing against her chest until her breath turned thin. She finally reached into her pocket, pulling out the note he had given her earlier that evening. She stared at it, her fingers tracing the handwriting. The words felt different now, heavier, more urgent, more heartbreaking. She whispered to the empty hill, "Please be okay." But the night offered no answer. After a few minutes, she turned and walked back to her car. Each step felt thick, as though the air had turned to water. When she slid inside the driver's seat, she rested her forehead on the steering wheel, allowing her breath to tremble, allowing a few tears to fall in silence. Then she lifted her head, wiped her cheeks, and whispered with quiet determination, "I'm going to find out everything. I don't care what it takes." She drove down the hill, her mind heavy, her heart full of fear and hope in equal measure. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that before she even reached the highway, her phone vibrated with a single message from an unknown number, and the words on the screen made her blood run cold. "Mrs. Bullock, if you want the truth, don't trust the people who took him." Sandra stared at the message glowing on her phone's screen, her breath catching sharply, as if someone had just placed a cold hand around her throat. The words were simple, but the weight behind them felt enormous, too heavy to ignore and too strange to dismiss. Don't trust the people who took him. The warning pulsed in her mind like a slow echo bouncing through a narrow room, refusing to fade. She read it 3 more times, trying to steady her hands, but the trembling only grew worse. For a moment, Sandra sat frozen inside her car, parked halfway down the hill, one hand gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The night outside was quiet still, almost deceptively calm. But inside her chest, everything felt loud and unsteady, a storm of fear and confusion swirling together with no sign of settling. She looked around through the windows, scanning the shadows, wondering who had sent the message and whether they were watching her even now. The thought made her heart race faster. She finally took a slow, shaky breath, trying to steady her mind. She needed to think clearly, not panic. Keanu was somewhere unknown with people who insisted they were helping him, but if this message was real, if someone believed those same people were not to be trusted, then she couldn't ignore it. She refused to let fear make decisions for her, but she also knew she couldn't pretend everything was simple anymore. Nothing about tonight had been simple. She drove carefully the rest of the way home, her mind drifting back and forth between the men on the hill, the urgency in their voices, Keanu's trembling admission, the fear in his eyes, and now this warning from an unknown number. Every piece felt like part of a puzzle she didn't have the picture for yet. Every thought made her heart ache more deeply. When she finally stepped into her house, the silence inside felt almost suffocating. She tossed her keys onto the small table near the door and leaned against the wall, her head tilted back, her eyes closed as she tried to keep her breath steady. The darkness in her home was broken only by the faint glow from a streetlight outside, casting long shadows across the living room. She felt a tight pressure deep in her chest, an ache she hadn't felt in years, not from fear for herself, but from fear for someone she loved. After several long minutes, she walked slowly to the couch and sank down, placing her phone beside her. She stared at it, waiting, hoping, terrified that it might buzz again. But it stayed silent. She picked it up and opened the message again, studying it carefully, trying to dissect every word, wondering what kind of person would send a warning like that. She checked for any additional information. No name, no signature, no follow-up. Just a single line meant to shift everything she thought she knew about tonight. She whispered softly into the empty room, "What do you mean, don't trust them?" Her voice cracked at the end. She rubbed her face with both hands, forcing herself to breathe. Then she sat upright, determination pushing through the fear. She was not going to sit here and wait. She needed answers. She needed to know where Keanu was, what they were doing to him, and whether he was actually safe or in danger. She needed to understand the truth hiding beneath all the shadows suddenly closing in around them. She stood up and walked to her small office space, where a dim lamp glowed over stacks of papers and a few photographs. Among them was a framed picture of her and Keanu from years ago, both laughing uncontrollably between takes. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the outline of his smile. Her heart tightened. "I'm going to find you," she whispered fiercely. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care who I have to go through." She set the photo down and grabbed her laptop, opening it quickly. She began searching through old contacts, people she knew, people who might know someone connected to the men who took Keanu, people who might have information about private medical teams or specialized research groups. She didn't know where to start, but she refused to give up. She kept typing, scrolling, making notes, losing track of time as the night deepened around her. After nearly an hour, frustration grew. She was hitting dead ends. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. "Think, Sandra," she whispered. "There has to be a way." The moment she said it, a memory flickered, something Keanu had said months ago in a brief, quiet conversation. A comment he quickly brushed off, something about a private research team he had been helping fund anonymously, a group working on advanced medical technologies and rare condition studies. He had mentioned them only once, and with hesitation, as though he didn't want to discuss it. She remembered how oddly vague he had been, how he changed the subject right after. Her pulse quickened. Could that be them? Could those men be connected to that group? And if so, why had they seemed almost too eager to take him away tonight? She stood abruptly, pacing the room. Her thoughts moved quickly, connecting pieces she hadn't thought to connect before. If Keanu had been working with a private team, maybe they weren't just treating him. They might have expected something from him, something beyond medical help. Something he didn't want to give, something he didn't trust anymore. She grabbed her phone again and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. "Hello." "Michael," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need your help. It's urgent." A pause. "Sandra, are you okay?" "No," she said, "and I don't think Keanu is either." She heard rustling on the other end, followed by a more alert tone. "Tell me what happened." She explained quickly, though she held back the most alarming parts, unsure how much she should reveal. Michael listened quietly, and when she finished, he sighed heavily. "I might know someone who can help," he said. "But it won't be easy, and you need to be careful. Some of these private medical groups, they operate outside normal rules. They can be unpredictable, Sandra. Some are good, some are not." The pit in her stomach deepened. "Then I need to know which one he's involved in." "I'll see what I can find," he said, "but it may take some time." "He doesn't have time," she whispered, her voice cracking. After ending the call, she returned to the living room, pacing with growing restlessness. The hours felt longer each minute, her worry twisting into something deeper, something sharp. She couldn't just wait. She needed something more immediate. She picked up the note Keanu had written earlier and stared at it again. The handwriting was steady, but she could see small signs, tiny irregularities she hadn't noticed before. Her heart tightened painfully. He had been struggling even when he wrote it. He had been afraid even then. She sank onto the couch, clutching the note to her chest, trying to hold onto the feeling of him still being close. The room felt colder, the shadows longer. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to focus, trying not to let the fear swallow her whole. And then, her phone buzzed again. She jumped, grabbing it instantly. Another unknown number. A new message. Her stomach flipped painfully as she opened it. This one was even shorter. He shouldn't have gone with them. Her hands shook. A second message arrived immediately. They're not who he thinks they are. Her breath caught. A third message appeared before she could react. This is about more than his illness. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing, her vision beginning to blur with panic. Then a fourth message appeared, and this one broke something open inside her. "If you want to save him, you need to leave your house now." Sandra stood slowly, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through her chest. She looked around her home, the quiet rooms, the comforting familiarity, now suddenly filled with an invisible danger she couldn't yet see. Her breath trembled. She whispered into the silence, "Why do I need to leave?" The phone buzzed again. "Because they're coming for you next." For a brief moment, Sandra could not breathe. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her fingers trembling around the phone as though it were suddenly burning hot. Coming for her? Why? She had done nothing except care about someone she cherished, someone she feared she might lose. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. Fear would not help Keanu. Fear would not help her. She needed clarity, strength, and a clear mind. She looked around the room, trying to sense anything unusual, any sound or shadow that did not belong. The house was silent, too silent. The quiet felt thick and unnatural, as if the world were waiting for her next move. She took another shaky breath and grabbed her keys, her bag, and her jacket. She did not bother turning off lights. She simply moved, guided by urgency. She stepped outside and quietly locked the door behind her. The night air wrapped around her, cool and still, carrying a faint scent of distant rain. She glanced down the street, checking both ends, seeing nothing but parked cars and the dim glow of street lamps. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. She flinched before forced herself to read it. This way. A link followed, not a website, but a small map pin location. It appeared to be an address only 15 minutes away, somewhere near an old industrial area on the edge of the city. Her instinct screamed at her not to trust it. But doing nothing felt worse. And she remembered Keanu's face, the fear he tried to hide, the sadness he carried, the way he held her hand as if letting go would break something in him. She was not going to fail him now. She could not. She got into her car and started driving. The road stretched out quietly ahead, empty except for occasional passing headlights. Her thoughts raced faster than the car. Who was sending her messages? Why did they care about her safety? Were they truly trying to help her, or were they manipulating her? She did not know, but her gut told her this felt different from the men who had taken Keanu. The tone of the messages was urgent, almost protective, not forceful, not threatening, just desperate. She followed the map until she reached a narrow side street near the edge of the industrial district. Old warehouses stood silently along the road, their windows dark, their doors rusted. The only light came from a flickering street lamp near a small parking lot. She parked her car and looked around cautiously. For a moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Then a figure stepped out of the shadows. She gasped, her body tensing. The person lifted their hands slowly, showing they were unarmed. "Ms. Bullock," the figure said gently. A woman's voice. "Soft come." Sandra squinted as the woman stepped closer into the weak glow of the street lamp. She appeared to be in her early 40s, dressed in plain clothes, her face tired but sincere. She looked like someone who had not slept in days. "I'm sorry for scaring you," the woman said, "but I had no choice." Sandra's voice shook. "Who are you?" "My name is Lee," the woman said. "I used to work with the team that took Keanu." Sandra's stomach twisted. "Used to." Lee nodded slowly. "Yes, I left when I realized what they were becoming." Sandra took a cautious step backward. "And what is that supposed to mean?" Lee hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone might be listening. "I don't have much time, but you need to know the truth before they twist it into something else." "The truth about what?" Sandra asked, her voice becoming sharper. "About his illness." Lee shook her head. "About why they want him." Sandra froze. Lee exhaled shakily. "Keanu's illness is real. The pain he feels is real. The confusion is real, but the cause, that's what they didn't tell him." "Tell me," Sandra whispered urgently. Lee stepped closer, her expression heavy with something that looked like guilt. "They believe he has a rare neurological pattern, something that appears in less than one person in millions, something that could help them study brain resilience under emotional stress. They want him for research." "Research," Sandra repeated, feeling her skin go cold. "He thought they were treating him." "They made him think that," Lee said quietly. "But they were studying him, watching how he responds to fear, pressure, emotional strain. They wanted to see how it affected his neurological baseline." Sandra felt sick. "You're saying this whole time they weren't helping him?" "Not the way he thought," Lee replied softly. "And when his symptoms changed, they decided they couldn't wait anymore. They needed to bring him in before he figured out the truth." Sandra pressed a hand over her mouth, her breath trembling. "Oh my God, he trusted them." "He trusted the wrong people," Lee said, pain flickering across her face. "And that's why I reached out to you, because he trusts you more than he trusts anyone, and because you still have time to reach him before they take things too far." Sandra stepped closer. "Where is he now?" Lee pointed to a large warehouse 2 blocks away. They brought him there. It's one of their temporary labs. They won't hurt him physically, but they won't give him answers either. And they won't let him leave until they get what they want. Sandra's heart pounded. Then we need to go now. Lee held up a hand. You can't walk in alone. They won't listen to you, but they will listen to me. I still have clearance. Sandra nodded slowly, trying to keep her emotions steady. Okay, then let's go. They walked quietly through the dimly lit streets, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. The warehouse loomed ahead, its metal exterior reflecting faint light. Sandra felt fear tighten in her stomach, but she kept moving. Keanu needed her. That was all that mattered. When they reached the side door, Lee swiped a small card and the lock clicked open. Inside, the warehouse was dim, filled with medical equipment, monitors, and glass rooms. Sandra followed closely behind her, her heart pounding with each step. Finally, they stopped in front of a small room with frosted glass. Inside, Keanu sat on a narrow bed, his head in his hands. Sandra gasped softly. He looked fragile, tired, lost. Her heart broke at the sight. Let me talk to him first, Lee whispered. Then you go in. Lee stepped into the room gently, speaking quietly to the staff inside, who looked surprised but didn't argue. After a moment, she returned and nodded to Sandra. Go, she whispered. He needs you. Sandra stepped inside. Keanu looked up slowly. When his eyes met hers, something inside him cracked open. Sandra, he breathed, his voice trembling. What are you doing here? She rushed to him, kneeling in front of him, taking his hands in hers. I'm here because you're not alone, she said softly. You're not going through this without me. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. They told me not to worry. They told me they were helping, but something felt wrong. I didn't know what to do. She squeezed his hands tightly. They weren't honest with you. They weren't helping you the way they promised, but I'm here now, and we're leaving together. His breath shook. I don't want to be a burden to you. She shook her head fiercely. You are not a burden. You never were. You never will be. I care about you, more than you know, enough to fight whoever I need to fight to keep you safe. Keanu's eyes filled with tears. Quiet, fragile tears he had been holding back for far too long. I was so afraid, he whispered, not of being sick, but of telling you how I felt. Her heart softened painfully. And how do you feel? He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I love you, Sandra. I've loved you for years, and I was so terrified of that truth. She cupped his face gently. I love you too. The words hung in the air, warm and soft and real. Keanu's breath trembled, and he leaned forward until their foreheads touched, grounding each other in the moment they had both been afraid to reach for. Before they could speak again, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Lee rushed in, eyes wide. We have to go, she said urgently. They know I brought you here. We don't have much time. Sandra stood quickly, wrapping an arm around Keanu to support him. Come on, she whispered. We're going home. They moved quickly through the corridors, guided by Lee. Alarms began to flash in the distance, but they reached a side exit before anyone blocked their path. They rushed outside into the cool night air. Keanu leaned against Sandra, his strength weakened but his eyes steady as he looked at her. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. She shook her head gently. I never will. We face this together now. Lee handed Sandra a small folder before stepping back. These are the real test results. From before they interfered, take him to a real doctor. Sandra nodded gratefully. Thank you, she whispered. Lee gave a sad smile. Take care of him. Then she disappeared into the night. Sandra guided Keanu to her car, helping him inside. She glanced at him once more, her heart full of fear, love, hope, and strength all tangled together. We're going to figure this out, she said softly, one step at a time. Keanu reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. As long as you're with me, he whispered, I can face anything. And as she drove them away from the warehouse, away from the lies, away from the shadows, the horizon began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. A new beginning. A second chance. A road they would walk together. Not as two people afraid of the truth, but as two hearts finally brave enough to hold it.